This week on the Futurists, the return of Marc Buckley.
In an exponentially growing world, and the world is evolving exponentially every second of the day, if we only improve incrementally, we are falling behind exponentially.
Hello all, I am Brett King. I am your host this week. Rob is, as we record this, Rob is basically stuck in LA helping a lot of his friends. Thankfully, at this point, Rob's house and neighborhood has not been affected, but I know at least 4 of my friends who've lost homes during the fires. And this really, there's been a lot of political discourse about who's responsible for this, water access and all of this sort of stuff. But we've never really had, since the Great Fire of London in 1666, a major city affected by fire like we've seen in Los Angeles in the last few weeks. I know this is going to air a little bit sort of a week or so after. Well, these fires are still going on as we're recording, but I wanted to bring in a specialist in regenerative technologies and looking at the way humanity as a whole will adapt to these extreme weather events. Let's introduce him as we get into that. Now, I will say one of the really major things that we have to discuss is the cost of these extreme weather events over time and how that's impacting us. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to interview or have back on the show a good friend of the show, Marc Buckley. He's a founder, he's a ecological economist, a regenerative futurist, and works on regenerative global food systems. He runs a bunch of organizations focused on regenerative tech. Alohas Regenerative Foundation is one of them. He's also a resident advisor and futurist to the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. He's the author of the UN SDG Manifesto, Sustainable Development Goals Manifesto, and a close collaborator of the UNFCCC. He's been at every COP since COP1. And he's heading off to Davos as in the next few days. So we thought we'd discuss that. He's also a board member of the Dubai Future Foundation, and a good friend, Marc Buckley. Welcome back to the Futurists.
It's good to see you, brother. Happy New Year, and I'm glad we got to ring in the new year together. So
yeah, we did. It was really cool, wasn't it? What did you think of the fireworks?
Oh, absolutely stunning. I loved it. I'm so glad you invited me. It's always good to see you, and we never get time to talk. It's always when we're relaxing, so there's no good time to get into depth and substance. And so I'm glad we could find the time to do it. Yeah, craziness around the world. We're going into Davos. I'm getting ready for the Road to Davos tour, so that'll be DLD Munich. It'll be the World Systemic Forum in Liechtenstein, and then it'll be Davos for about a week of craziness. And we're at the cusp of still ongoing fires in Los Angeles, California, and extreme devastation. And 2024, we had insurance claims of $200 billion US, and already in 2025, we're still in January, and we've already hit $150 billion US. So we're going to blow right through that for this next year. And it's not just California that's set us over the limit. It's many things going on all around the world. So it's a crazy time, but we've got reports that are going on, like from the Financial Times, that the uninsurable world, how insurance industry could fall behind according to climate change. Where do we think that insurance and paying to replace after things have been damaged is a good practice? Is that
instead
regenerating?
of stopping things from getting
preventative.
damaged, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, this is interesting because, 1666 was, the fires of London, as I mentioned, that really created the global insurance industry, property insurance industry, right? Because so many properties were wiped out during the Great London Fire. But the fact is, we haven't really changed the modality of insurance. The idea is we hedge against all of these risks that might affect your property instead of saying, let's make building codes fireproof, hurricane proof, etc. for those, flood proof for those areas which are prone to those natural disasters. But that's not commercially viable. Instead, we'll wait till something comes along and wipes it out. But that's, as you just pointed out, that's sort of becoming untenable. I mentioned to you in early, no, it was late 2020, I think, or early 2021, I was invited by the Swiss Banking Association to do an event in Zurich. I'm pretty sure it was Zurich. It was either Zurich or Geneva, but anyway, with the Swiss Banking Association, and the CEO of Swiss Re was there. And I was very interested in this issue because I was already talking about the fact that insurers were going broke in Florida because of the extreme weather events there. There's something like 17 property insurers have gone bankrupt in Florida in the last 12 years or something. It's pretty crazy numbers. And we know that there were insurers pulling out of policies, just as little as a month ago for properties affected in Pacific Palisades. And certainly this started back about a year ago when they obviously had information that, these areas were at risk. So I asked the Swiss Re CEO, I said to him, so what are you guys going to do? How do you hedge against that? And his answer was pretty brutal. We're just going to stop insuring properties in those affected areas. Now, from your knowledge of these issues, that doesn't seem like a viable solution to the insurance problem, because so many capital cities alone, 570 at last count, are going to be affected by sea level rise. This doesn't account for other extreme weather events, apart from sea rise, such as hurricanes that hit North Carolina and the fires that have hit LA. So it's one of these real questions. How are we going to insure properties in the future? Maybe that's the wrong question, right?
Exactly. It's absolutely the wrong question. I'm glad you bring it up because it goes back a lot further than even the fires of London and in the UK. Where did we ever think that insurance, gambling, betting against it not happening, and then saying because we have that insurance, if it happens, we'll be reimbursed to rebuild all those memories, our home, our pictures, our paintings, our videos, our memories, the place where we lived, our kids grew up, and that is a good way to live or hedge against bets. It's a big gamble and it's pretty risky. Whereas if we just adopted a better insurance plan, regenerative development, or even sustainable development, you probably heard of that before, which is a great people planet protection plan to keep us at a certain degree of warming. But what is development? What is just regular development? It's the built environment. It's how we live. It's roads,
Right.
highways, infrastructure, commercial, residential, schools, university, hospitals. And we've been building business as usual, high carbon scenario since the industrial revolution, basically, and not a lot of improvements or anything. So 2015 come along, the sustainable development goals, and a lot of people say, wow, bubblegum colors there. Who are they for? Are they for countries? Are they for cities? Are they for corporations? No, they're the built environment. It's how we live. We're saying this is not a perfect plan. It's just a step with more better practices. It's what we call the low carbon scenario. And it means more circular economy, better materials, better methods and certifications of building, better urban planning, HUD and PUD developments, and how we built the environment, a little bit more sustainable and equal for all. it's not perfect, but that was the plan. And we're 5 years till reaching the Paris Agreement or the Sustainable Development Goals, and we haven't made much progress. So what is regenerative development goals? Well, that's a way to regenerate the earth and to restore and rejuvenate things. And it's also the built environment and how we live. And instead of ensuring against sustainable development or ensuring against regenerative development, we actually have to build the environment in the right way so that we have a better place to live that is full of water, it's full of trees, it's full of oxygen and things that capture carbon. We can still have homes in those areas. We can still have businesses and roads and highways.
They just have to fit with the environment.
They have to fit with the environment. And it's actually a better economic model. And we're actually seeing with regenerative development, just regenerative development alone, by 2050, it's projected. So in 25 years from now, today to 2050, it is at 280 trillion US dollars. 280 trillion US dollars, just regenerative development alone. And it's a better model. This is the
development we need to invest in to minimize chaos,
well, I
right?
mean, with business as usual, just regular development, just till 2030, so another 5 years left to go, that 15-year period, just regular development, the high carbon scenario, they're going to spend 89 trillion or 90, I think it's up to 92 trillion now because of the war and the pandemic and the Brexit and all those things that have driven costs up and maybe even higher. We're going to spend that money regardless. So the money's there, it's going to be spent. And if we spend it a little more sustainable, a little more regenerative, it seems like it's a little bit more, but we have much more resilience. We have much more adaptation, mitigation. We have much more regeneration, and it creates an abundant set of economies, new jobs, and really some securities for intergenerations into the future and good ways to live. So, it's funny because in December 2024, so at the end of the year, there was a staff report at the Congressional Senate hearing. It was a report that was presented, and it was done. It's called Next to Fail. The climate-driven insurance crisis is here and getting worse. It was a report specifically about insurance and climate, and it was presented to the U.S. Budget Committee and government and what risks they see coming. The United States military does that as well. They're saying the biggest risk is not, even in our volatile world right now, is not other countries or wars. It's the biggest one is actually climate change and not preparing in the proper way. And it's not something that governments should only be doing. It's actually how we want to live in the future. How do we want to evolve and live in certain places? And as we see, it doesn't matter how rich you are or how expensive the homes are, climate change just doesn't give a fuck. And it's going to come after you one way or the other. And so if you build a concrete jungle and a house in a concrete jungle and don't mitigate against water in your soils and healthy soils and surrounded by trees and clean air and food forests and those things and beautiful environments to live in regardless, then we have a big trouble.
I mean, it's been so heavily politicized, these fires in LA, but the fact, you can't blame any political system for this chaos that we've created with the weather systems. I mean, they're trying to blame Gavin Newsom, and they're saying he wanted to protect some species of fish. That's why we couldn't have picked up the ocean water to spray on the fires. But you don't actually want to use ocean water for spraying on fires, because then you ruin the land with salt, right? So, like, even the comments that, this politicizing this and saying we're trying to protect some rare species of fish, and that's why they didn't use the seawater to douse the fires, shows a lack of sort of credible understanding of the problem. But here's the thing is often we see these politicization of these things to avoid the real conversations we need to have about spending the sort of money that is required. We know, for example, New York has a plan to stop sea level rise and impact of, things like Superstorm Sandy from occurring again, particularly for the southern part of Manhattan, because Superstorm Sandy, the total cost of that was about 90 billion, right? So LA is almost twice that, not quite, but we're talking about a significant cost of impact. To protect the lower part of Manhattan from sea level rise, the estimates range from something like 35 to 50 billion dollars, right, to protect the lower part of Manhattan. So why wouldn't we spend that money if the next Superstorm Sandy is going to be $100 billion of damage? Well, the answer is because no one politically can get this sort of spending for climate change done in places like the United States because because there's been so much misinformation historically about this, and it's become so climate change, or the climate crisis, which is a better term, has become so politicized. So then the question is, how do we get from, we know the data is so clear now in terms of the cost that extreme weather is having on the planet and the exponential risks of this, including reports, as you say, from the UN, the US military, etc. It's like no one is hiding the potential. The insurers know how much this is going to cost. That's why they're unwinding from these states like California and Florida where there's these high risks. So everybody knows, but we're not dealing with this politically, Marc. Now, you work at the World Economic Forum, you're going to Davos, at the end of the week, you're involved with the UN, of course, working on the Sustainable Development Goals framework and so forth there. So you're right in the midst of the politics of this on a global basis. How do we start to get real policy-based planning for regenerative approaches to building and living more sustainably if there's such political divide over this?
That's the golden question. So really it's no matter what international organization you're talking about, whether it's the EU Commission, whether it's the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Government Summit, and all the governments, even BRICS now, and their new currency, they're having trouble unifying on a plan of action, long-term vision for the future. There's still competition and divisiveness amongst them all, and I am not too optimistic that besides the European Union and the ESG taxonomy, there's another group of countries creating policies and regulations for the environment and for human rights. And that's why, I mentioned the EU Commission. It's really the biggest organization in the world doing the most for the environment and human rights, due diligence directives, human rights violations, fair wages. And it's doing it in a way that if you want to do business in or out of the European Union, you have to get on board, or you won't be receiving products from them, or you won't be shipping your products there for them. And 5 months ago, they came out with a digital product passport. That's the biggest thing that has really pushed in that direction for regulation. So that's the only organization I see moving in the right direction in regards to this regulation. But as far as the other organizations, they are still very corruptible. The last two COPs were very heavily involved with the fossil fuel industry, subsidies hosted in fossil fuels, presidents, CEOs of that, and giving a lot of subsidies in the trillions of dollars to fossil fuel companies. So I really think the lobbyists and that have hijacked our politics and our regulations. There's a way to get around them, and although I'm not a big Trump fan, I definitely think that it's going to be a shakeup, and him and Elon Musk and many others will come in and hopefully really change how regulation and policy is seen. It's also going to shine a microscope and a magnifying glass on how failed most of our systems are. And we're not understanding the basic needs of human beings and where we need to go. Because the built environment, where we live, what's happening in California, sure, we buy these luxury mansions and live in these places, and we pay for that, and we get mortgages and insurance. But really, that infrastructure is something that is regulated through policies for how we live and how those zones are divided up, how they're built. And they're still built on this high carbon scenario with very little green zones, very little what we call circular economy, cradle to cradle, Green Building Council standards, DGNB, which is the highest world certified standard for the built environment. It's the German sustainable building certifications that takes economy, environment, and people into consideration as they build. And we're just kind of getting into places. We don't fix them up. We don't renovate them. We don't really do what we need to do to not just raise the value, but to raise the living standard by re-greening, by making sure it's a place that has the right things and processes to avoid, how do we say it, heat zones, bad air, not enough water, kind of this desertification
Water
and
damage.
things for protection. There's a couple places that, because I follow a lot of regeneration, there's a couple places in California, and especially that have burned, that were regenerative homes and small regenerative farms. And all of those were protected during this fire, because I don't know if you've ever built a fire before, but it's really hard to burn green wood.
True.
It's really hard if there's moss in the soil and you have lots of mycorrhiza, mycelium, lots of ground cover, dark, rich, deep soil, and the trees are full of water and life and creating oxygen, and you have that protective barrier to burn that because it's full of water. And those homes miraculously and properties have been saved. Whereas those that are surrounded by concrete, there's no trees that are heat zones. We can see on the maps that they're gone. Well,
Yeah.
My friend Ron Finley, I was just speaking about this. They call him the gangster gardener or the guerrilla gardener. He lives in LA. He was affected by this, not as bad, but he was prosecuted and fought and won for putting a food forest on the curbs. He was going and planting food, fruits and vegetables and different things that could be eaten right on the curb. And they says, hey, you're not allowed to do that. That it needs to be concrete, or it needs to be some kind of non-edible plant or something, or just gravel. And he's tried to regreen LA in different parts. And we need more or less food deserts and more green areas and the way we live. And I think that's just, how do we want to live? And we should start going that way. It's the best insurance plan that we have. And so
do you think though that, I mean, if you've got green areas, the problem you've also got is that there's more stuff to burn if you've got extreme heat as well, which was part of the problem in LA. It's, it's fairly, the neighborhoods like Pacific Palisades and Malibu, they weren't exactly, green, wonderlands. They had some greenery integrated, obviously, trees in neighborhoods and things like that. But it was also, LA's the classic concrete jungle, and still it really didn't sort of help it too much, did it?
Well, there wasn't enough green, and it wasn't the right type of green. I'm not talking about topiaries or kind of this very Disneyland kind of greenery landscaping. I'm talking about actual trees that have deep roots, and that there's water, that you're actually generating water and moss and hold in the soil and capturing carbon. If you know, I used to live in Sausalito, but if you know much about California and the things going on with the Central Valley and all the problems with heat, water desertification, and food problems in that area, this isn't something new. It's been going on for over 30 years or more, and it's been getting steadily worse. The thing in that area is there's, in the last few years, they have these times when you can water your lawn. There's a big movement in a lot of areas where they're saying, you know, you're cut down on watering your lawn's going brown. We'll come by and fill it up with gravel or cement it in, or we'll do things like that. There's been a big push the last 5 years to have maintenance-free properties. Usually, mainly lower income properties do that, and the other ones turn it into like the golf grass or the kind of landscaping that looks real beautiful to walk across, but it doesn't create a lot of cool zones or
Right. So
deep,
this is
rich
really
soils.
a key thing, right? Is if you've got concrete, it creates heat.
Where does that come from? That comes from planning and urban development. That's what I'm trying to say. That's a policy and regulation. It's already there saying, no, we need to preserve water. We don't have enough water. We're buying water from California or from Colorado, and Utah, and
I mean, California, I mean, Los Angeles doesn't have enough water. It has to import it. I mean, some of it even some comes from Colorado, and there's a big debate about that, particularly for, watering the almond plants and stuff like that, the extreme water usage used for commercial farming. We've got obviously next generation farming technologies that could be deployed, but they're not commercially viable today. And sustainable development of property isn't commercially viable in the traditional sense. But this is where we have to start rethinking about, like, if the economic losses from extreme weather events are going to be so massive, then we have to rethink our settings on what's commercially viable anymore, because we have to invest in infrastructure that is climate ready. We have to mitigate climate issues, the heat, the extreme heat. Think about places like Riyadh and Dubai, where you and I spend a fair bit of time. We are going to have to engineer the environment for human survivability. But you sort of think of that as extreme weather or extreme heat. But let's face it, LA, like, there's no better argument in LA or in Miami, for example, than saying just preventing future insured losses and property losses due to extreme weather should motivate a change in the way we think about infrastructure in those environments. And we're not there. We're not there. So it's like, how far away are we from this, Mark? I mean, is it going to have to get to the point where the US is suffering $1 trillion of extreme weather related losses every year before finally some political action is tenable? Or, is it a number of human lives that are lost? I mean, how's the conversation take place at places like Davos and the United Nations when you guys are saying what's finally going to get governments like, the Trump or the Biden administration, or, these types of government administrations, into the right policy mindset? What's it going to take?
Well, it definitely will take a lot of damage and destruction before they get that wake-up call and they're forced to make some changes. The biggest pressures, were things like the Ukraine war, Gaza war, the pandemic, the Brexit. When we see a new president come into office in the United States or in other areas that is controversial, those are always wake-up calls to humanity to say, hey, this system is not working for me anymore. I want to change. What does a better system look like? And then they begin to look. And so right now we're run a lot on growth and GDP and capitalism. But did you know that there's more than 32 ecological economic models out there in our world, and a lot of them are showing great opportunity and success that are being implemented. There's a new book, well, not too new. It's called Earth for All from the Club of Rome, that's talking about 5 different economic models that they've all, ecological economic models that they've all put together into one to kind of replace our current problems with economics out there. And I know everybody on this who's listening to this podcast can name at least 5 ecological economic models, and we're not even aware of it. I ask economists, and they're like, "Nah, I couldn't name 5. Micro, macro, that's not an ecological economic model. That's classical. That's regular economics that don't work." But you've heard of circular economy, you've heard of donut economics, you've heard about the SDGs, that's an ecological economic model. You've heard about regenerative economics, well-being economics, gross national happiness. So there's many new ecological economic models, more than 32, and probably even more just as we speak. And as we go into this new year, come out of Davos, we'll hear about much more. And we hear about these gaps and lack in funding and money all the time, but it's not the money that's a lack. It's the lack of political will and human beings to realize what we're talking about is not something that is distant from our daily life. We're talking about the built environment and how we're
talking about what we've always done as humans, which is adapt to the environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, hey, listen, we've got to have a break, but before that, I realize we haven't done this with you before, Marc, so we have a little lightning round that we like to give to our guests so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better, but it's very futurist focused. So this is the quick-fire lightning round. What was the first science fiction or futurist story you remember being exposed to in media, TV, movies, books when you were younger?
Time Bandits, Xanadu, and Dune are probably 3 big ones. 2001 Space Odyssey, things like that. Those were
cool
ones.
What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
I think right now we're at the cusp of a super cycle. AI, quantum, and biotechnologies. I think it's really we've never transformed humanity before except at an AGI moment in time. And
let's talk about quantum after the break. I definitely want to get into quantum. Yeah. All right. Is there a futurist or a forecaster, entrepreneur that has really influenced you personally?
I would say you, because of our friendship, and because we're on your show as well. But I do respect you immensely. The other one is Michael Sean Conaway. I work with him a lot. He's a director and filmmaker and a really good human being. But believe it or not, in sustainability and regeneration, the things that I do, those futurists that are thinking about the plans and the models, civilization frameworks for the future are my biggest heroes, because they're trying to build that future for us and they're trying to talk about it so that we can build that out. And I would say Daniel Schmachtenberg is a big advancement on that. I really like Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's really was on the SDGs as well. So those are just a few that I really like. Of course, I studied at Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis, and so those are the regulars. But I don't know if they would make my list. I think I have a higher rigor than that.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably put Kim Stanley Robinson, just because he's written about the climate futures in a way that not many others have, but
I've got his books here on my shelf, and we worked on the Resilience Frontiers project together. He came in about 1.5 2 years after we started it. Just so you know, so I wrote the manifesto for the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations as a futurist, but I started the next iteration of goals that come after the SDGs And that's in a program called the Resilience Frontiers. And the next set of goals will be the Resilient Development Goals. And I'm really at kind of turmoil for myself because I know they're great, and I think that's the direction we need to go and build resilience into to absorb these shocks that we're talking about here on the podcast. But actually, I'm hoping that next year or this year we'll actually leapfrog the resilient development goals and go straight to the regenerative development goals. We're going to present a book on the regenerative development goals to the United Nations this year.
That's cool.
And try to move in that direction, because that's really what's going to regenerate, restore, and fix a lot of our economic and political problems we have in this world. It's just a better operating model.
Okay, so we've delved away from the lightning round back into talking, which we always do. But let's just one last question before we go to break. Is there a futurist story or a science fiction story that is most representative of the future that you hope for humanity? Or do you think it's yet to be written?
I think it's currently being written right now, and I believe it was started over 70 years ago by our Buckminster Fuller. He played the world game and asked the question, what does a world that works for everyone look like? He played it at the World's Fair, and I'm kind of trying to run with is asking people, what does a world that works for everyone look like for them, and play that game to write that story, because if we don't have a vision of what that future looks like, it'll be hard to get there. And I've spoken to several directors and people to kind of help, how do we get that in a movie or a nice story that everybody can rally around? But otherwise, cool. I would say no.
Well, that's the challenge we're going to put out to the audience right now. Let's collectively build a story about the future, what it could be like. But let's take a quick break now. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm with Marc Buckley, UN resident futurist, and we'll be right back talking about quantum regenerative futures in a moment. Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, and in the guest chair this week is my good pal, Marc Buckley. He's heading off to Davos at the end of this week to talk about regenerative futures, and we thought we'd jump in and talk about some of the emerging technologies that are going to impact this. Marc, just last month, Google announced a new quantum chip, Willow. There's a lot more talk about quantum at this point. We've got a couple of interesting conversations going on. OpenAI 04 edition has shown some really strong reasoning capabilities. And, in classic terms, pretty much every sort of variation of the Turing test that we could have envisaged just, 5 or 10 years ago, we now have these AI models regularly blowing these out of the water now. So, there's a debate over whether we've hit AGI or whether we just have these predictive, text algorithms that are just getting much, much better at, the conversational stuff. But let's sort of take a step back from that, because when we talk about AGI, we're generally talking, we're talking about sort of NVIDIA GPU-driven, AI data centers and so forth. But when we talk about quantum computing would seem to me to be a much more potential platform for real sort of substantive consciousness from an intelligence perspective than silicon, or some sort of mix of the two. Classic computing running AGI algorithms paired with quantum. But where do you think this is going to go? Where does quantum fit into the AGI question, and particularly the question on consciousness itself, do you think?
I'm glad you asked, and there's many crossovers. I'd like to start first with this whole sentience. So it was 2 years ago now. Blake Lemoine, Lambda AI, Google, came out, and he was saying that Lambda AI had gone sentient and was pretty adamant about it, and it ended up in him leaving his position at Google, and it was a pretty cushy corner job executive, so to say. It was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance in the defense of technology. And we're seeing this all over now, that human beings are willing to lose their livelihood in the defense of technology because of sentience. I think the question is wrongly placed, because in the natural world, bees, birds, mycelium, mycorrhiza, trees, they've been sentient for 3.8 billion years, B with a billion, and we've never had the debate or question or defense to say, this
What about
bumblebee's
this other
sentient.
consciousness that
Yeah,
already
it's
exists on
getting
the planet?
pissed that we're eating its honey and messing with its systems,
Yeah.
and it's going to come and sting us on the butt because it's sentient and it's going to take us over. And so our place in those type of things, we're sentient beings, and we don't have these debates, and maybe vice versa, that should be there. Did we domesticate technology, or did it domesticate us? There's a lot of questions that are probably wrongly placed, but I just want to make sure that we know that sentience has existed in many other things that we didn't create, that are living systems, and we're actually the creators, the parents, the parents of AI. And so if we do get artificial general intelligence and it does go sentient, then hopefully we have been ethical stewards, and we have AI for good that will do the right things. And so far, I see that is something that we can pretty much rely upon, that won't go down the wrong way. And there's a lot of people working on that, the ethics and the risks of that. And that leads into the whole quantum thing. And I really want to touch on also the Willow and that you mentioned, and quantum computing. The father of string theory said it the best, and he was pretty adamant about it. He says, plants have been doing quantum mechanical things for 3.8 billion years, creating oxygen, doing photosynthesis, healing the soils, capturing carbon, giving us food. Bees in the natural world have done quantum mechanical things. We as human beings are quantum mechanical beings. So
Right.
that quantum mechanical has been around for quite some time. And the reason we started going down the road of quantum computing is we were trying to figure out, how in the hell does that plant do quantum things, create oxygen, capture carbon, photosynthesis, heal the soils, give us food, all those quantum mechanical things. So we want to try to get a compute to figure out how we can do that to make our life more efficient. It's part of the advancement of the Green Revolution. That's really how that whole move started, and we got down the road to go there. Now we've just seen this wonderful breakthrough with Willow, and I think it's still in its infancy. I think the time in 15 minutes, which would take, I don't know the exact number, quadrillion of years or beyond that, quintillion, to process the same thing with normal quantum computing, this Willow chip can do in 15 minutes, which is absolutely amazing. But I think it's still in its very infancy, and what it can do is not as exciting as I would hope it had been. But I'm still very optimistic that will advance in a very super exponential way. A lot. What I'm really excited about is neuromorphic quantum computing. Neuromorphic quantum computing. And it's basically, the way to think about it, it's the way our brain naturally works. I just got done telling you that we're quantum mechanical beings, and we, like plants and bees, have these quantum mechanical processes. We just haven't figured out how we can do all that, how we regulate all these systems at the same time. But that's where this neuromorphic quantum computing comes in, because it works very similar to the human body, to the way our brain works.
This
and it's
is,
also distributed in the cloud in the universe. So
yeah.
it's not in a box. It's not in some cold
No, it's in the
hyperbaric
quantum
changer.
foam. It's in the
It's in
quantum cloud.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's in the quantum cloud. It's like looking at the universe and not putting the universe in a box. It's leaving it in that and kind of in this cloud. And so I feel much more hopeful with that. And I have to caveat, I also um, signed a partnership with Dynex Moonshots. It's the philanthropy arm of this neuromorphic quantum computing. They're one of the leading edge companies of Dynex who's doing that. And I'm very hopeful. And what we're specifically using it for, and it's not a secret, we'll actually be talking about it at Davos and launching some things, is we're doing uh, an update of the World Model 3 from the Club of Rome and the Limits to Growth book, and basically a digital twin of the Earth so that we can start to do quantum computing at scale for things that will solve human suffering and our global grand challenges, specifically in the development area of what things can we do in development beyond insurance and throwing money after bad to build out the development of our future of how we want to live on Earth. And what is calculating the return on investment, so to say, or that before we start working.
How do we live more aligned with quantum theory, with basic physics? I've talked about it on the show a bit before, but for those of you that are interested, I've been following along actually for a number of years, since the mid-90s, Roger Penrose, who's a mathematical physicist, theoretical physicist, based out of the UK, I think at Oxford. And he proposed a quantum theory of consciousness. It's called the orchestrated objective reduction theory, and it proposes that our consciousness arrives when quantum wave functions collapse in these microtubule structures, which are tiny structures found in neurons in the brain. And these collapses, according to Penrose, are caused by gravity and are part of sort of essentially our self-awareness and biological structure. This is also supported by work from Stuart Hameroff, who studied these tubulins, these proteins found in microtubules. So what they're saying is that part of our consciousness, the reason we haven't been able to find part of the brain where consciousness is encapsulated, according to Penrose, is that our consciousness is a quantum effect. It's collapsing wave functions in the quantum realm, and our brain, the microtubules in our brain, are interpreting that. So this, if this is the way human consciousness is built, if it has a quantum element to consciousness, then this changes the game for quantum computers, because quantum computers can, working in this similar way would mimic the human function of consciousness and would give us, at least theoretically, a way to have machine consciousness and human consciousness married at the quantum level somehow. But I'm getting, this is obviously getting pretty sci-fi. But what I wanted to get back to was, where are we likely to see quantum being used to enhance our own consciousness in the short term? Because, besides us coming up with a really measured and well-qualified theory on quantum consciousness, which we can't prove Penrose's theory at this point. Mathematically we can, but not biologically at this point, because we don't have the granularity. Although, I don't know whether you saw, there was this recent, some researchers, I think out of Stanford, produced a new brain scanning technology. And did you read about that? And they were able to see that there's existing MRIs and EKG or ECG rigs and so forth are measuring in certain frequencies, but by creating a lot more broader frequencies, they were able to see that the brain is transmitting on many different harmonic frequencies. And it's not just the electrical signals we currently get with ECGs or EKGs, I can't remember, because one's heart, one's brain. Or let's call it
ECG.
BCIs. Yeah, let's call it brain control interfaces or measuring devices. But now they're able to see in much higher resolution that there's a lot more going on with communication of the brain. So anyway, long story short, where do you see quantum really coming into the mix where it's going to challenge our decision-making processes, or where it's going to really advance us scientifically in terms of understanding the world around us?
So I'm glad you brought that up, and it's hard not to go off on different tangents or branches or go down some rabbit holes, but I'm going to try to keep it succinct as possible. What you mentioned with these scans and ECGs and that is a form of resonance, and it has to do with frequency. You mentioned the frequency. If any of us have heard, or at our age group have probably been in an MRI machine at a hospital. Well, that's a magnetic resonance imager. It takes frequency and goes down, looks into the atoms and into our body to see what's going on. And we use that technology all the time. And in my foundation, the Alohas Regenerative Foundation, we have this resonance project.earth where we actually use frequency and resonance to align people and to get get everybody on the same page through frequency, because when frequencies align, they amplify. And by you bringing up that on what we're discovering and how we're diving deeper down to this knowledge, is we're learning more and more, and we're discovering and unlocking the keys of what's always been there. It's always been right in front of us. We just didn't use the full capacity of our brain or have that understanding. And when I said earlier in the speed round that we talked a little bit about, what's the future, who's telling the story of the future. I said there's 70 plus years old from Buckminster Fuller. What does a world that works for everyone look like for us? Is we need to get everybody on the same page and give us that understanding. And I've interviewed 3,800 people on video before, asking them that question. And only 7 out of the 3,800 plus people I've had on video and asked that question knew the answer to that question. Well, that's a big, huge problem. And so I went and asked AI. I asked AI that question, and it immediately knew the answer to that question. And so what I'm getting at is the answer's already there. The answer we've had and it's floating around. We just weren't asking the right questions. We also didn't know where to get the information. We're not learning it in school. And so 3,800 people didn't know the answer, but boy, ChatGPT and AI knew the answer because we trained it with our books and our writing. So it got the information, and it got it many times that it knew this was the right answer, and then was able to teach us on that. And that's a big problem with the level of our researchers, our scientists, our futurists, those people who are looking at what does regulation policy, what does the future of quantum computing, what do all these things do, and how do they tie to the natural world, how do they tie to us, and how do we get that information that's not being taught in school that really sets us on that super exponential pathway. And there's a saying that I'd like you to understand. It's not just a saying, it's actual fact and reality. In an exponentially growing world, and the world is evolving exponentially every second of the day, if we only improve incrementally, we are falling behind exponentially. And so I am not only a futurist, I have technolust, and I know never before in human history have we transformed from one era, age, or epoch to another without innovation, without some kind of future technology or an advancement, a general purpose technology, AI, quantum computing, and those
steam
things.
engine, electricity,
Yeah,
the
steam
wheel,
engine, pneumatic tire, all those
the
things.
sword versus
and
rocks.
AI, quantum, and biotechnology, those are general purpose technologies, and we're at that super cycle to really skyrocket us into the future. We're living beings.
I mean, this is we talk about this every time we get together. We talk about the potential for this stuff, but the truth is, like, the Industrial Revolution was pretty disruptive. If you worked in agriculture, for example, it was pretty disruptive. But we've got AGI, quantum, and climate all happening at the same time. It seems to me like the level of flexibility and adaptability that the human species is going to need to navigate through the next 20 to 30 years requires an extreme adaptability to be able to absorb these changes. And the more we fight the status quo, which we see with the populist movement and things like that, the problem with that is, we have 300 years at least, 300 years of technological development that shows us you can't resist technological change, especially not something as powerful as AGI and, next generation quantum computing that are going to unlock the secrets of the universe and, next generation scientific advancements, solving, cancers, et cetera, et cetera. All of this happening simultaneously as the sort of extreme weather events we're talking about, and 570 capital cities being regularly inundated with flood water from sea level rise. And this is even before the Greenland ice shelf or the West Antarctic ice shelf goes. I don't know how Trump's going to fix the Greenland ice shelf if he takes over Greenland, incidentally, but that's another conversation. But all of this happening at the same time, how do we prepare humanity for the type of resilient thinking, the type of adaptive thinking that is going to be needed to really take advantage of these changes, when we know historically that there's a lot of resistance to change when these big technological leaps happen?
It's an advancement. We need to have that learning, and there is a resistance to change until we realize we don't want to be in the same diapers that we left the hospital in. It's a pretty stinky outlook. We should probably change and grow and change our clothes and our perspective and outlook. It's called evolution. We want to evolve and not just live in the caves. And we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. And so when we're talking,
I like that.
we left because there's better ways of doing
Yeah,
living.
because there's better things than stone, than iron,
Yeah, iron, innovations of fusion, many other things. But one specifically, let's drill down to AGI, to artificial general intelligence. And so there's a group of economists and scientists that have been studying on this quite some time, and it's whether it's 2035, 2040, or 2045, they believe that AGI will be reached in those timeframes. But when AGI is reached within the same 12-month period that it is reached, they're saying GDP will jump up to a minimum, and this figure is highly conservative economic projection, a GDP of 15 quadrillion US dollars. I'm not talking trillion, I'm not talking billions, 15 quadrillion US dollars for the GDP. There's a lot of other assumptions as well, like we're continuing on GDP capitalism, the same economic models and gross domestic product as we have always. That's a huge astronomical number, and that's just AGI. Now, let's think a little step further, and they have done that. That's what futurists do and economists do. They think well into the future. They do projections and systems dynamic modeling to do future scenarios. So the next one that they did is they said, let's take AGI and just regenerative development, not regenerative agriculture, not regenerative economics, just regenerative development, the built environment. And they put those two together in that same 15-year period of time to 2040. And there was a modest output, a modest super exponential growth output, just as we have been doing it as normal with GDP. We would have 865 quadrillion US dollars, and that figure is based also on a highly conservative economic projection. You go a step further and you combine quantum or neuromorphic quantum computing and AGI and regenerative development and those economies, and that number shoots up to I believe it's 15,360 quadrillion US dollars, astronomical, in that same GDP model. I'm hoping that we won't stick with a extractive and a growth in that respect GDP model, and that we will rejuvenate, regenerate, and kind of have more regenerative or ecological economic models that are based off a global replicable hectare. That means that we actually improve the quality of life and leave the earth better than we found it. But those are
I don't know why
astronomical
that
numbers.
should be such a. I don't know why we should still be debating this in
Yeah.
2025. But all right, let's do this as a thought exercise, because I always like to finish off the show with this. You know, we are today closer to the year 2050 than we are to the year 2000, because we're in 2025. So take us to 2050. Take us to 2050 years. In a more optimistic view of the world based on quantum and AGI and regenerative. What major changes do you see, you know, for those societies that have got their act into gear? I don't necessarily think the US is going to be amongst them, but for places like Saudi, Dubai, UAE, China, and so forth, who are showing real interest in embracing these technologies and shifting their modality. What's the world going to look like in 2050 where in terms of really outstanding differences from today?
I'm glad you asked that, and it's rare that I'm ever asked. So in that 25-year
Got to
period,
go futurist, dude. You know, that's what the show is, right?
In that 25-year period, we will not be talking about SDGs, ESG. Have you done your climate reporting? Have you done your sustainability reporting? There won't be the taxonomy. We will have that GDP minimum of 800 plus quadrillion US dollars. AGI is such a, when it comes about, will be such a powerful thing. It will know how to create a civilization framework that brings everybody up to the average medium of livability standards that
right.
Is equitable. Whether you say that at that point in time it's 80,000 a year and a family house with this energy, whatever, and that everybody on earth will have that. There won't be people in poverty, because if one person on this earth suffers, we all suffer, and that we won't have
this. But what you're describing,
yeah.
Most politically aligned on the right would call that you're advocating for socialism or communism if you say that sort of thing about quality of life. But what we're not talking about a political system here. We're talking about application of available technologies. To have this standard of life you're talking about across the planet is not a technological limitation, it's an economic and policy limitation right now. And the old arguments that, if you wanted to create a high standard of living for everyone in the world, you'd have to lower the standard of living in the West. Yeah. This is the traditional argument. It's like, it's bullshit. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, like, look at the greenfield opportunities in Africa. You're telling me that Africa can't have broad solar implementation there that's going to radically change, energy availability. You can't tell me that we can't generate next generation sanitation and water desalination technologies. Not that we'll need water desalination in Africa, for example, that will be able to recycle materials more effectively, that will have AGI involved in planning. All of those things suggest that we should be able to provide certainly longevity very cheaply, access to compute power will be very cheap, access to energy will be very cheap, despite the debates that we're having now. And that is what's going to transform the global economy into something that's a much higher quality and standard of life for everybody with that level of automation. it's not a political argument unless you're thinking in 2025 terms. This is why you have to think exponentially. And you and I both being alum of Singularity University, that's one of the first things that Peter Diamandis talks about when you first, he talks about the exponential walk, right? If you're walking exponentially from here to the back of the auditorium, he always uses that illustration, right? And instead of taking just one step, you use that exponential curve, the advancements we can make is just incredible. And this is the compute power is going to bring us this capability. What do you think your life is going to be like in 2050, brother?
Before I say that, you brought up the exponential. I believe beyond that as well. So we're in all living systems and their subsystems, as long as they're living systems, 1 + 1 never equals 2. It's always a super exponential. So it's beyond 30 steps. It's actually 300 to 3,000 steps. It's a super exponential, and it verges on what we call quantum tunneling. Because living systems most of them are quantum mechanical, they're sentient, they have this ability that if we work with living systems instead of using reductionism and mechanization, it's actually an abundant super exponential world, and our businesses, everything that we do can have that application, and it's just a much better thing. For me, I see myself living in a couple places in the world as a global citizen. I'm already a global citizen now. I have a couple passports. I travel most of the year. It was 31 countries last year and 287.
You got the badge
events.
to prove it, man.
Yeah, yeah. I was only at home a few times because I see the world as my home, and I also carry my home around with me wherever I go. So it'll be a beautiful continuation of that. I want to have a few homes around the world. I'd like to have a regenerative farm in Chiang Rai or Chiang Mai in Thailand. I'd like to have one in Sun Valley, Idaho. And then, of course, I have my organic farms here in Germany, and in southern Germany, there's 20 in Europe. And so I eventually want to probably just have one bigger one in southern Germany.
I'd love
Germany,
to work with
Austria.
you on that, brother. I'd love to work with you. I know others here too.
Be kind of off-grid, self-sustaining, more regenerative in that respect.
I think we've got to forget the concept of the grid entirely. We don't have to be held by the grid anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I would like to create my energy. Have you seen that new joke about the Enron egg?
Oh yeah,
going around.
The
That's
Enron
hilarious.
Nuclear egg. Yeah.
The Enron nuclear egg.
I mean, if they actually did come out with that, that'd be pretty cool. Although I'm not convinced that you could protect the house from radiation. But I will say, just before I saw you over New Year's, my girlfriend Julia and I had been up in Chiang Mai, and we'd spent the day at a elephant rescue resort where the elephants live in their natural habitat. Basically, they're just free to wander, and the humans will accompany them and help them with food, grooming, medical, that sort of stuff. Because, the point that they make is humans have impacted elephants. They've moved them out of their natural habitats. They've affected their air quality, the water quality, etc. So now, we're stuck with the fact that we need to be with them. But working with these animals for the good part of a day, and seeing their personality, their emotion, you can't deny that these amazing creatures have a form of consciousness. And I think the greatest gift that AGI may give us is to understand that consciousness is actually a broadly present artifact on the planet. It's present in mycelial networks. We know plants express, communicate to each other. We know animals have very complex communication habits now. We're starting to be able to translate that. This was depicted quite well in the series Extrapolations with the whale communications and stuff. But my point is that consciousness is an artifact that seems to be quite common. We just haven't included other consciousness in our deliberations about the planet, and AGI may force us to do that. Not only that, but we may have to negotiate with quantum AGI in terms of arguing our perspective, and we're not going to be the smartest person in the room anymore. right? In terms of pure logic and the application of scientific realities into decision making and attacking things like, how we tackle the regeneration of the planet and become more resilient. What happens when AGI says capitalism is a bad model, right? Imagine the hoops and connuptions that the capitalist machinery is going to try and walk through to defend itself against AGI, saying, capitalism has had its day. We need a better system. You can see the resistance that might occur there. But I think if AGI is going to have a IQ of 10,000, then we're not going to be able to win that argument. So it comes back to adaptability, and our ability to embrace change, I think, is going to be one of the things that really identifies whether you can move to the future in the most productive way possible or not. Because the more we resist and we try and reinforce those existing human systems, let's face it, capitalism, particularly the hydrocarbon economy, is what created climate change.
Absolutely, yeah.
Pretty
if you
straightforward,
ask AI right now, is capitalism a good thing, GDP growth and extractive, micro, macro, classical, it will tell you those are already a bad model. As a matter of fact, we're talking at the beginning of our conversation about insurance. If you ask that, if that's a good model, and if it does anything to do prevention, adaptation, to bring back people's lives and memories, it says it's absolutely like gambling. It says it's a bad idea, and those are things that are often asked. So I'm glad you say that. The other thing, besides kind of living in these regenerative farms in this regenerative way that I would like to live, I would like to make sure, and we haven't talked about the jobs report that came out from the World Economic Forum or by Forbes, what the jobs of the future look like. We always focus on about how many jobs have been taken away or that our job won't be the same, but we don't talk about how many new jobs will be created and what the economy and the future will look like, and our livelihood and our equality and what we are remunerated as for those relearnings of the future, a future of how we live on Earth. But it's enormous that, we might lose 91 million jobs, but we will create at least 280, 290 million new job types. And if we're looking at this regenerative development, we need to retrain architects and engineers and builders and contractors and infrastructure
to work with the new tech,
to learn how to build, to adhere to those standards and build into that future that will take us out into space and will take us to countries all over the world without harming humanity or environment at the same time, and give us the future of food. Those are really exciting, opportunities. So, and that's what I want to be, one of the builders of the future. But one of my good friends who's also a futurist, Parag Khanna, I probably should have mentioned him.
Parag's been on the show.
He was at the Dubai Future Forum and talking, and many others. But he says, we have those original 5 blue zones around the world where people have these long lives and live long. But there's a lot of new regenerative blue zones popping up around the world. And he said Singapore, where he lives, was one of the new ones. And the basis for them being qualified as a new blue zone was that they have a lot of tennis courts and a lot of dog groomers and air conditioning and things like that. My definition of a blue zone or a regenerative way of living in life is none of those things. I think it's one that the quality of life is much different and much more abundant. It's not one of reductionism and mechanization. It's one of quality of life and human health, and that we don't have these global grand challenges. We raise the bar for humanity and say we'll never go below that. We still have problems.
Sure, but we're living sustainably. We're living longer, healthier lives because of it, and we're not focused anymore on just economic growth. We're focused on the growth of intelligence and consciousness, and really taking our scientific understanding to the next level, which is why ultimately capitalism has done us well. It's served its purpose. Ready to move on to the next thing. All right, Marc, I want to finish up because we're running out of time. But before I go, tell me a bit about, because we'll be listening to the show just as you come off your week of activity at Davos. So tell us a little bit about what's happening at Davos for you in terms of the sustainable or regenerative development goals and initiatives.
Okay, perfect. I do the Road to Davos tour. I've been doing it for about 14 years now. And I usually stop at DLD Munich, then I stop at the Youth Forum Switzerland, which is like a World Economic Forum just for youth at an international school at Zug and Luzern. Then I go to the World Systemic Forum in Liechtenstein and Flums, which was originally started as the Hus Institute and then went to the Systems Change Foundation. I co-founded that with my good friend Rudy Hilty of the Hilty family that does the construction machinery. And it's inside a mountain work, like mining work, that they host the event. And it's not the Davos, but it's kind of the counter to the World Economic Forum. It's a World Systemic Forum. How do we use systems thinking and systemic change to improve our world? And the Prince of Liechtenstein, many wonderful people are there, and to talk about these world-changing things. So I'll be speaking there mainly about food and also about regenerative development and the numbers and kind of, because everybody asks me when I talk about it, whether it's sustainable development or regenerative development, it's always, show me the money, Marc. Where's the money? How do we do it? Oh, there's a gap. And nobody understands it. They actually, Brett, they think when I talk about regenerative development, they think I'm talking about regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
It's the entire approach to society, right? Well, it's been a great pleasure. What if anything really cool happens at Davos? Please make sure you give us an update.
Yeah, so at Davos though, when I didn't get there, but I get to Davos and up at the Schatzalp, we have the CSO Award, Chief Sustainability Officer Award Gala dinner. And the top $100 billion companies in the world will be honored with the top 3 chief sustainability officers and their awards and their contributions, moving sustainability forward. And then I'll do the regeneration roadshow. So from drawdown to regeneration roadshow with Regen Intel. We'll be doing that at the Climate Hub in Davos, and then we'll be in the open forum, in the closed forum. There's 17 talks and events going on all together. And I've got a delegation coming from Thailand. People, nice. Texas, Mimi, and
Mimi.
Chief Operation Officer, they'll be there.
That's
and I've
fantastic.
got the 7th Project Development from Dubai and Indeed Innovation from Germany. So we're going to be having a lot of fun talking about regeneration and development and making new friends, talking about quantum and AI and dispelling myths and fears, and excited for the new future. Giving out the new SDG pin. I gave you one of these. I don't see it on you.
I got it.
I'll be giving out some of those, and will be great.
All right, brother. Well, listen, fantastic to have you on. For those that want to follow Marc and keep up with what he's doing, you can go to marcbuckley.earth. That is Marc with a C. And if you want to follow him on social, Marc Earth is his Insta. What's your Twitter, Marc?
Twitter is also Marc Earth. And then if you go to alohas.bio, alohas.bio, that's my foundation. That's probably the best site. Marcbuckley.earth is kind of old and scrambled.
All right, sorry. So check out alohas.bio.
I also have my own podcast, Inside Ideas. It's good, but I haven't.
All right,
done
check that out. Well,
year.
if you got a mid-roll for us, we'll slap it on the show this week.
I will. I'll send it to you.
All right, Marc Buckley, thanks for joining us on the Futurists this week.
Thanks, brother. Always a pleasure to see you.
Good luck in Davos. All right, that's it for the show this week, guys. Please show us your support. Tweet us out. post on this, comment on the feedback, what you'd like to hear us talk about more. If you like this talk about regenerative futures and so forth, let's see if we can get Marc and Robert and a few others on a panel and have sort of a live session one day with get some of you guys to join and throw your hat in the ring in terms of solution setting. That'd be really interesting. So Marc, let's work on something like that as well. Maybe we can get a few of our fellow futurists to join.
We didn't even, your book on banks is fabulous, but we didn't even talk about what if instead of looking for the money or guessing where the money is, what if we create a regenerative development bank? What if we create a division in the World Bank?
I just sent you a deck on a new form of crypto or stablecoin currency that's regenerative. So we got to talk about that off the side.
There's so much more we could talk about.
Well, I think we have to change how money works for it to be true, for the planet to be truly regenerative. So anyway, Marc, it was wonderful to work with you. And once again, and stay in touch.
Thanks.
That's it, guys. We'll see you next week on The Futurists. Until then, we'll see you in the future.